Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to extend a warm welcome to you all here this morning for our pre-budget breakfast meeting here in the Shamrock Lodge Hotel. It's great to see so many familiar faces as well as new ones. And I wish to extend a warm welcome to those who have joined us online. Sorry, but you missed a scrumptious breakfast. My name is Regina Bushell, and I'm the President of Athlone Chamber of Commerce. I have spent all my life living and working in Athlone, and I am proud of my town. And yes, it has its challenges, but so many positive stories and a great future ahead that all of us can influence. This gathering of very diverse businesses provides us with a valuable opportunity to engage in constructive discussions and exchange ideas on how we can work together towards creating a more prosperous future for our community and country. To continue these discussions after today, I would urge you and encourage you all to join Athlone Chamber of Commerce. We are, of course, here to hear from our panel and what Minister McGrath has to say about the upcoming 2024 budget. And as an SME myself, like many in the room, we have been challenged in running our business, and it will be interesting to hear what's next on the government agenda. So more about that later. I wish to thank our sponsors today, RBK, THUS and DPD, and acknowledge the continued support of the Chamber by Westmeath County Council. And I'm delighted to welcome Barry Keogh here today from Westmeath County Council. I would like to acknowledge some people also who helped us today, Robert Troy, Vinnie McCormack, for their help in communication with Minister McGrath's office. And I would like to welcome our Senator Micheál Carrigy was here earlier, but unfortunately got called away to a raucous meeting, but I had a good chat with him earlier. I'd like to mention Councillor Tom Farrell and congratulate him, and indeed all of our councillors who were re-elected this weekend. Congratulations to them all, and thank you, Tom, for joining us today. Before I introduce the panel, just the fire exits are here, and obviously through the door you came in, and I think there's another one there at the back. So to our panel, well, I suppose ladies first. Dr. Alison Sheridan is head of the Department of Business and Management at THUS Midlands Midwest. She holds a BCom at NUIG and a strategic human resource management from Sheffield Hallam University and a PhD from DCU with a focus on natural human resource management in service sectors and SMEs. Having gained significant experience in both private and public sector in the HMR management roles, Alison joined the Department of Business and Management in 2008. And as a lecturer, she has delivered modules across a range of areas, such as human resource management, resourcing talent and reward management, in addition to supervising MBS students in both business and HR areas. Her current research interests include the influence of social media in HR practice in SMEs. Then we have Mike Scanlon, who works in RBK. He is an AITI Chartered Tax Advisor and is Fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Ireland. Mike has over 20 years' experience in tax, specialising in corporate tax with a broad range of expertise in advising owner-managed businesses in large corporates across a number of sectors. Prior to joining RBK, Mike trained with Deloitte Dublin, held a number of management roles in accounting practices in Waterford, and most recently was head of training and technical support for Tax Assist Ireland, a network of franchised accountants with over 20 offices across the country, boasting a combined portfolio of 6,000 clients. During his time with Tax Assist, he also spent 2 years in the position of interim acting managing director. Next to Alison, we have Lorcan Allen, who will lead our discussion today, and he's a business editor in the Business Post, where he leads the paper's business and financial marketing coverage. He also covers corporate sustainability and climate action, with a particular focus on development in Ireland's energy, pharma and agriculture sectors. He also has a regular contributor to national radio and TV, including The Last Word of Matt Cooper's, RTE Morning Ireland, and Virgin's Media Tonight show. In 2020, Lorcan was named Business Journalist of the Year at the 2020 New Brands Ireland Journalism Awards. Before joining the Business Post, he served as an agribusiness editor with the Irish Farmers Journal, and he was awarded a Nuffield Scholarship in 2017, where he researched how Ireland's agri-food sector could adapt climate action measures and transition to a more sustainable production system. Colin Kennedy is the Executive Director of CI and CEO of DPD. He also sits on the Board of Directors. His role is to oversee strategic journey, implementing DPD's vision of innovation and delivery, and orchestrating digital transformation across the organisation. As part of his wider role, he also holds responsibility for international trade, logistics and sustainability. Michael McGrath is currently a TD for Cork South Central and is the Minister for Finance. Michael grew up in the harbour town of Passage West in County Cork. Before entering national politics, Michael served in local government as a member of Passage West Town Council and Cork County Council. He was elected to Dáil Éireann at the first attempt in 2007 and has been re-elected in every election since 2011, 2016 and 2020. Michael secured a first-class honours commerce degree in UCC and went on to qualify as a chartered accountant with KPMG in Cork City before going into politics full-time. Michael held senior positions, both the private and public sector. So then there's me. I'm the Managing Director of multi-award winning Grovelands Childcare, which operates 6 quality childcare facilities across Athlone, Tullamore and Mullingar. We employ 140 staff and cater for 800 children, which allows up to 15,000 people to go to work every day. We currently deliver government schemes, NCS and ECCE, and we support all the colleges and universities around the country by providing quality work experience to their BA students. I am Chair of Childhood Services Ireland Trade Association within IBEC. I am also the Chair of SHASUS, which represents independent creche business owners. I've been an advisor to all Ministers for Children, and currently I'm on the number of groups with the DCE DIY with Roderick O'Gorman. I am working on an apprenticeship with IBEC for our sector, as well as workforce development and retention of staff, reducing administration for the sector, and lobbying for early years as educators to be added to the critical skills list. I regularly contribute to radio discussions in RTE, News Talk, Midlands 103, and the sector issues. So, let us begin. Okay. Lorcan, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Regina, for the introduction there. Folks, we've about an hour here, so we've a broad range of topics to discuss. Minister, I might start with you. We've had a very busy weekend of the local and European elections. You might give me your reaction to the vote over the weekend and what you think that says about the current government and the work you've been doing.
Sure. Thanks, Lorcan. And can I just start by thanking Tommy and Regina and everyone at the Chamber for the invitation. It's great to be back, and to thank your sponsors as well for supporting the event once again. I'm delighted to be here and to have the opportunity of meeting with you all, and look forward to a very good discussion. In relation to the elections, look, we're pretty pleased with the outcome overall, Lorcan. Certainly from a Fianna Fáil perspective, the opinion polls had not predicted that we would come in at around 23%, and it looks like we would win certainly one seat in each of the 3 Euro constituencies, and we're in with a shout in Ireland South for a second. But I think more broadly what it confirms is that the next election is all to play for, as in the general election. Certainly right through last year and even up to quite recently, the narrative was that Sinn Féin were going to be the biggest party and they would be leading the next government, and look, who knows, that may well be what yet transpires, but I don't think so. And I think what the election proves is that it is all to play for, and that the government parties are in a stronger position than would have been assumed up to the election. So we take comfort from the results, but we're not getting carried away, and local elections and European elections are not necessarily a predictor of the next general election. We saw that in 2019, where, for example, Sinn Féin had a really bad day in the local elections, but went on to do exceptionally well in the general election. Only 8 months later, people who failed to get elected to the council then romped home and topped the poll in the Dáil. So a lot can change. Politics is volatile, but I think it does just prove the value of hard work on the ground. What I take some comfort from is just one of the exit polls had a question about what candidates you met during the campaign, and the party whose candidates was met by most people was our own party. So it just reaffirms to me what I've known, that we're very, very embedded in communities. It is hard work on the ground. It's doing your very best for the people you represent in the communities that you serve, is ultimately at a local level in particular what people respect and reward. Of course, it's a different decision when it comes to a general election. It's about a government for the next 5 years, and that's why we have to get the bigger picture right and have the policy offering as attractive as it can be.
And from your experience out on the ground over the canvas over the last few weeks, this government has arguably had more firepower to do things than previous governments, I suppose, after the crash. Are some of those policies at national level, were people talking about them? Are they seeing the work that the government is doing? Would you be encouraged by what you picked up on the doors?
Yeah, and look, delivery is always a challenge when you announce new schemes and you make funding available, even for capital projects. It can take a long time, longer than you like sometimes, for that to make its way through the system and be visible on the ground. But I think there was a recognition among all of the people that we met that we did our best during COVID, that people were looked after, reasonably well, that we did support businesses. You talk about us having firepower, like that's not an accident. It's because the finances have been well managed, and when you are in relatively good times, that's when you do have to be responsible. You do have to put funding away, because we know from our experience there will be another downturn, there will be another shock, and so you can't spend it all today, despite the temptation being there. And I think people did recognise generally that the government, is doing its best. There are huge challenges, which I know we'll come on to discuss, but it is about who do you have faith in and who do you think has plans that are credible and realistic. And I think people recognise the economy, broadly speaking, is in good health, and that gives us the capacity then to try to respond to the enormous housing challenge and all of the other challenges that we face. So certainly not getting carried away. But we held our general election vote and actually increased it a little bit. And given all that has happened, COVID, the cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine, the energy price shock, inflation hitting 10%, we've been through an awful lot over the last 4 years. So look, the general election will happen at whatever point in the next 6 to 9 months, and we look forward to it. But it's going to be a huge challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, this is a pre-budget business breakfast, so we might come on to some of those business issues. Sure. and what's going on at the minute. Colin, if I could start with you there. DPD is a huge employer in this country. Mm-hmm. You're a logistics company. Minister mentioned the strength of the economy there. If you guys are busy, that's a fairly good indicator that the economy is doing well. Mm-hmm. What's your sense of, from your perspective, in terms of DPD's business, is the economy going well at the minute? And maybe talk as well about some of the challenges in the economy at the minute in terms of inflation that we've seen over the last year or so.
Yeah. So, we are seeing that the domestic economy is growing quite well for us, very strong. And we clearly had a massive shock in the country when COVID came along, and that has driven a change, a really significant change in the types of businesses that we deal with. So, for example, at that time, an awful lot of businesses had to transition. They had to move from having bricks and mortar businesses to e-commerce, for example. Now, that actually continued. That growth continued once COVID passed by, thankfully, and so we're seeing the benefits of that. And now that might be at the cost of retail, maybe, right? But as an industry, we're seeing very strong growth. We're in quite a unique situation, I guess, as a business, because we have close to 9,000 actively trading customers across all of the different sectors within the business. So we actually get to see trending in the economy quite early on. We can see things happen really early when we can see volumes or parcels, as we call them, reducing in certain sectors, and it helps us prepare for what might come along. So another thing that we've seen, I suppose, really is in the last number of years is that the growth of new business, right? As in new businesses starting up, we've had a really significant number of new businesses coming along, and that's good for the economy, and that's delivering a lot of growth for our business. So all of those things are good. I would probably just to temper it a little bit and say, you know, we're a global company, and internationally we are seeing a different scenario, I suppose, in some of the other jurisdictions in which we operate. And there's definitely, on a global stage, we can see in certain areas of the world a slowdown. So, you know, we're not seeing that, but we are definitely cognizant of it, and we're keeping an eye on that because, you know, what happens elsewhere in the world, you know, depending on what we do here, can seriously impact us at some point. Not seeing it at the moment, but it definitely is happening in some of the larger economies across Europe, for example. Yeah. The challenges, really the challenges are the ones that everybody has around people. You know, there's because we're running at close to full employment. That's very good, but it presents other challenges to us as a business. Things like wage demands, quite significant, I guess, really. And we're having to respond to that because people are really important to the business. We're a people business, so therefore we have to respond to those types of demands. Some of the other things that are happening at the moment around, say, for example, auto-enrolment, some of the policies around sick leave, all really fantastic policies. We support them. But as a franchise organisation, we have probably 36 organisations which are across the island of Ireland, which are quite small, and they are real challenges.
Able to absorb those.
Yeah, there's a cost, and there's also a resource deficit as well in some of those businesses to support these really good initiatives.
Yeah, Minister, I think that's a lot of the feedback on some of the employment changes that have come down the line. Like, they're welcomed, but it's been able to absorb them by businesses that I know the government is reflecting on maybe the pace that all of these things were brought in on.
Yeah, a lot has happened in a short period of time. We acknowledge that, and I know that no employer would begrudge their employees getting a decent wage because they too are grappling with a high cost of living, and they are entitled to have a decent standard of living. And I hear that message consistently from employers, to be fair, as well. But what employers do raise concerns about is the amount that has happened over a short period of time, with more to come. And so we are reflecting on that in the recent package that we announced alongside Minister Burke for SMEs. We did signal that there would be engagement with the Low Pay Commission so that they would take account of the report that the Department of Enterprise has prepared that looks at the cumulative impact of the whole range of different measures. We've also indicated that there will be a pause on the further changes to sick pay until we have a report back from the ESRI, just to look at the impact of that. The auto-enrolment will happen next year, and the commencement date is yet to be fully nailed down, but the legislation is making its way through the Oireachtas, and that will, in terms of the rate of contribution required by employers, it will build up gradually. We do think it is in our interest collectively as a society to make sure that we are making proper provision for the long term, so that people have decent incomes in their retirement as well. But we had the recent package. There will be a significant enterprise element in the budget in October. I'm engaging quite intensively with my own officials at this point, even though it's a number of months away, to scope out what options we have and to see what more we can do. because I am very conscious that the cost of doing business has really grown in recent years. And of course, businesses too have had to carry increased funding costs if they have debt. The cost of servicing their debt has increased, and of course energy, such a huge input cost for many establishment-based businesses, and we are seeing the pass-through now of some of the wholesale energy price reductions to a retail level, but there is continued pressure there, and the sense I get from many businesses is that they are busy, footfall is generally good, but the cost of doing business is the major challenge that they face, and that's why we're seeing, you know, even some businesses deciding to stay closed on a Monday or a Tuesday, and because of the cost of opening is so high. And so we will take that on board and reflect further on it and see what more we can do in the budget.
Okay. Regina, your sector in particular has been really impacted by costs, I know from speaking to several companies in the childcare sector. You might explain some of those costs and how difficult it's been, I suppose, for your industry.
Again, you've mentioned an awful lot of the costs that are there. I suppose for our sector, it's very specific in a way, in that it's different from other businesses, in that at the moment where, you know, I mean, if you're a hotel or any other business, you can actually maybe recoup some of the revenue that you're losing. But for us, we can't, because we're in a fee freeze. And that fee freeze was imposed, I suppose, by government in 2017, which meant that we couldn't recoup any of the addition, all of the costs that you mentioned here. We've had no way of actually making that up again. So we are seeing services close. Again, the impact is more on smaller services, and they are SMEs, the very same as any other SME, in that they're struggling to get staff and compete with other businesses to employ staff. They have to pay more, and again, we weren't able to recoup that money. We've entered into core funding. I'm not going to go into it. It is very, very specific to our own sector, but it is extremely challenging. But I think the government will need to recognise the importance of our sector to the economy. That became very clear during COVID. The importance of us being on the front line, being able to open, to let people go to work. As I said this morning, alone our services in Groveland's childcare allow 1,600 people to go to work every day. If you multiply that with 4,500 providers across the country, it's a lot of people. So the government need to step up to the mark. They need to support the services that are there, and they need to ensure that people have places, and I suppose that's part of it as well. The infrastructure at the moment, 75% of it is provided by independent providers around the country. I know we're looking at all of that and looking towards the future, but at this moment in time, there are providers out there who need more information, and we need to know where we're going and how government are going to invest for the future in the sector.
Okay. Alison Sheridan of TUS, Colin mentioned staff challenges there. I mean, you guys take in graduates and they bring them through your college. I suppose, what are you seeing there on the ground at the minute, and how do universities play the role in helping to solve those skills challenges in the economy today?
Sure, and yes, we do see that there's a great demand for graduates, which is really healthy from our perspective as a third level provider. It's great to be able to say to our graduates, you know, a large number of you will be in employment within X months of finishing in relevant roles, so that's really good. In terms of what we do to connect with employers and to try and, I suppose, help, and it works both ways. We're very keen on applied workplace projects. We're very keen on placements, and so, for example, even in my own department over the last year or two, we've included placement modules as part of every one of our business digital marketing law degrees. So we're feeding those out to employers as placement students, and from an employer's perspective, from our perspective, of course, the students really benefit from those placements, but equally the employer gets to sort of trial out you know, a potential graduate, and that really, I think, helps them. Plus we see it as well in terms of our workplace projects where they work with the company, or research projects which are applied. So we see that there are ways in which we can work together with industry where there are shortages, and that it's a win-win for both of us in terms of what we can do to build the skill set of our graduates.
Do you see more companies, businesses coming to third level institutions during times like this where there's shortages, trying to get directly to the pipeline?
Absolutely. Like our placement coordinators operate as placement coordinators, and they're sometimes semi-employment agencies by times, because people are coming back to them saying, can you recommend somebody, can you do something else? And we're delighted to be able to help, because that's what our business is. We're very regional in our focus in terms of supporting the region. We're very conscious that our region is made up of 99.9% of SMEs. That's what we're feeding into, and it's those particular businesses that need our help. And of course, multinationals, they're great too, but they are a very small percentage. So in terms of looking at the regional economy, we're very conscious that those are our partners, and they're the people that we want to be conscious of how we can help them and how we can support them.
Mm-hmm. Mike Scanlon, you're a senior tax manager with RBK. The government has introduced various different tax packages and things to try and support workers and businesses over the last few years. Give your read of some of those, and maybe what you think in the upcoming budget you'd like to see that might help or be effective.
Well, I think if we look to the last budget overall, it was broadly welcomed by the business community with incremental improvements and changes to some of the schemes. So look, even the nods to the angel investor tax relief, while I know in its current guise has some problems, angel investment, if you look at entrepreneurship, it's the engine of the economy, but the engine needs fuel, and fuel comes in the form of capital. So that recognition of angel investors was welcomed. I think that relief in and of itself probably needs a little bit of tweaking, just to make it more accessible to angel investors. Being honest, we probably would have liked to have seen them included in the entrepreneur relief that's there, just to broaden that out. But in general, I suppose the feedback we get on a lot of the schemes is that they're all very welcome, but what kills them a lot, and I'm probably doing myself out of a bit of work here, is the minute we get involved, the scheme is probably going to struggle, because that adds to the costs then of trying to access it, get the funding. It eats into the funding that you're going to get. So I think the watchword really going forward for future announcements is simplification and keeping things simple for businesses. We've spoken about the capacity constraints, and a lot of business owners, I think, are getting dragged back into working in the business rather than working on the business. And the businesses that we're seeing really flourishing are the ones that time is such a precious resource. It's the one that people probably don't appreciate enough, is time to be able to step back and look at how their business is operating. And look, like Colin said, the domestic economy is going well at the minute, but looking for those headwinds that may be coming down, or within an industry, are there changes coming down the track that you need to pivot and move towards? So any of these schemes, the simpler it is to access, to get the funding out quickly. Like I suppose in terms of the cost of doing business at the minute for the SME sector, they're price takers. They're not going to be able to go in and kick down the door and negotiate too many volume discounts and stuff like that. And the schemes that the Minister announced just during the summer, if you look at it, the trading online voucher is one that's brilliant. People need to get towards that e-commerce piece to open up a brand new revenue stream for them. The Microfinance Ireland loans increasing to 50,000 is very welcome also. And even outside of what was announced during the summer, the likes of the SBCI loans, the growth and sustainability loan is an excellent one at a time when the cost of funding is quite high, albeit we're probably seeing a little bit of a softening there from the ECB with rates reducing. So look, it really is that simplicity that we would be looking for. Looking forward to budget 25. As I said to you, Larkin, it's a dangerous thing to ask a tax consultant what he wants in a budget, because we could be here till breakfast time tomorrow. But if we look at maybe a couple of things that we would be looking at in terms of recruitment and retention, a big piece for businesses is thinking outside of the box. So I suppose if you look at employers in the region now, previously you would have been competing in a kind of an hour to an hour and a half commute. But since COVID, with the advent of remote and hybrid working, you really are competing nationally for staff. And it's looking at offering something different. So in terms of share remuneration, a lot of employers now are looking at rewarding their employees with a little bit of equity. Gives them skin in the game, ties them in. I suppose the downside of it is that when you go and say to employee X, look, I'm going to give you X amount of the business, they're hit with a tax bill. So there's an income tax bill coming to them. So maybe if there could be some look to deferring that tax hit until the shares are sold. So at least then when the shares are sold, there's funds there and they can fund the tax bill themselves. What's happening at the minute generally is the shares are being awarded to the employee and they're immediately looking back to the employer to say, yeah, but I owe this tax and you're going to have to cover it for me. So again, we have an increased cost there. In terms of entrepreneurship, like I said, entrepreneurs are the engine of the economy. They're the dreamers and we need them to foster new ideas and innovation and grow employment, in particular in the regions, because entrepreneurs tend to be loyal. Then they'll stick to their hinterland and provide jobs there. Like I mentioned already, the entrepreneur relief is an excellent relief, a 10% CGT rate up to $1 million. Maybe the lifetime threshold could be increased a little bit. I know there are some anomalies inside it as well that I suppose don't take account of some of the commercial setups that may be there. So you could have someone who, entrepreneurs by their very nature, they don't concentrate on one thing. They maybe have their hands in a few different pots. And there is a working time requirement to get the entrepreneur relief. So it basically kind of cuts it down to one business, but you could have someone with multiple companies, not in a group structure. So maybe we could look at that. I suppose the other big challenge of our time is accommodation. And I was only talking to an employer last week who was saying that what he would love to do, he does have access or has ownership of a couple of derelict sites, that what his plan would be is to renovate, retrofit and provide them to employees. But the tax cost then in terms of BIK would just be too much. So he was saying that he'd love to be able to do it, and maybe even in terms of employer-provided accommodation, if it was constructed or bought by the employer, to look at maybe granting some form of capital allowances
and
for
there's
that.
certainly a lot of buildings around the country that could fall into that. Minister, a few things there that you might address. I mean, I think the summer economic statement is due shortly from yourself.
Yep.
You might explain, I suppose, what that is and what that will, what we might expect to hear from that.
Yep.
And also maybe some of the things that you're working on longer term for the budget.
Sure.
If it's in September or October, we're not sure.
I think Mike made some really good points there. We are working on a number of those issues. So, as you know, in the last budget, I did announce a tax simplification initiative. So through the TALC subcommittee, that work is very advanced, will conclude, I think, very shortly. It's very much focused on business taxes. And I've always said to my own officials, and I'm only in the department a year and a half, that when we introduce schemes, we shouldn't knock the good out of them by making them so complex that nobody can access them. Let's keep them as simple as possible and as accessible as possible. So there will be outputs from that simplification process, some of which will be administrative in terms of the interaction with revenue, and some will be policy based, and some will require legislative change. So I am receiving the outputs and the feedback from that at the moment. In relation to share-based remuneration, again, there's a comprehensive review of that underway, and the outcome of that will feed into the budget process as well. On the angel investor relief, so I hope to be in a position to sign the commencement order very shortly. It did require a certification process to be put in place between Enterprise Ireland and the Revenue Commissioners. But if there are tweaks needed to the scheme to make it more effective, bearing in mind that it hasn't commenced yet, that I am open to that, and will examine any specific suggestions in that regard. We will examine again the revised entrepreneur relief. We did publish a comprehensive report last budget day looking at the assessment and the cost benefit analysis of that report, and it is positive in terms of the net impact. Now, it is a very broadly based entrepreneur relief, and we will examine that and also examine is there a better way of achieving the outcome of supporting entrepreneurs.
Challenges for the government. I mean, we don't like to talk about it enough, but like wealth is a real thing in Ireland now that we need to address. I suppose from a taxation perspective, we have a lot of very wealthy. There's a lot of wealth creation going on in this country, and our tax policies need to, I suppose, evolve.
And we want to keep it in Ireland.
Yeah.
And we want to deploy that capital in a productive sense. I want to get it to work. So one of the issues that we're very anxious to make changes with is in relation to retail participation in terms of investment products, funds products that can help to get funding into businesses. And again, the funds review is almost complete. I'll have it in the next few weeks, and that will feed into the budget process, particularly around some specific taxation issues, just to enhance retail participation in the fund sector, which could be really good for businesses too. We did make a number of changes to various schemes in the last budget around employment investment and incentive scheme, the startup capital scheme, the SURE scheme. There was a constraint in that there was a new general block exemption regulation at an EU level about a year ago in June of last year, which does set the limits of how far you can go. And I've asked my team just to re-examine that and to see is there anything further we can do to further enhance the attractiveness of those schemes. But to your core question, the summer economic statement, it basically sets the parameters of the budget, and it makes clear how much funding we intend to make available for new initiatives on the tax and on the expenditure side. And so we have to take account of the macroeconomic environment, the outlook, the current fiscal position, the outlook for the public finances over the period ahead. We have to take account of the fact that inflation has fallen. Thankfully, is now below 2% in Ireland, but price levels remain high, even so we're experiencing disinflation, not price reductions in general. We have to take account of all of that, recognise that the economy is, if not hot, it's pretty warm at the moment. And there are capacity constraints, and we don't need to unnecessarily add more fuel to the fire either. So we have to get that balance right between providing the support that is needed, try and unlock some of the blockages that are there. So it's not all about money, it's about reform as well. It's about reforming our planning system, for example, and that legislation was in the Dáil all yesterday evening. We're really anxious to get that through. So we'll have the summer economic statement next month, and that will set the guardrails of the budget, and then the micro decisions then get made between then and budget day in terms of the estimates process that Minister Donoghue will lead with the line departments, and then for me it is about the overall public finance framework, and then the whole area of taxation across all of the different tax heads, but we're going through it in great detail at the moment.
Colin, from your perspective in DPD, are there things that you'd be keen to see in the upcoming budget this year from your business perspective? I know, like, as a company that operates in the transport sector, decarbonisation is very important to you, and the fuel, I suppose, that your fleet operates is a key thing. And you know, there has been the biogas strategy has been announced recently, but you know, things like that would be, I'm sure you'd be interested in seeing more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a business, there's kind of two things that really are important to us. Okay, we've spoken already about our people, but it's also about the environment and the lives that they live as well. So from a people perspective, we've spoken about that, some of the things we'd like to see included in the budget. Simplification and reduction of overheads when it comes to how we can support employment. So they're really important to us. We're fully in support of the initiatives that we've seen there, but we just, for smaller businesses, we think it's really important that has to be easy and low cost for businesses to look after. On the environment, we really invest heavily on the environment and on our emissions. It's true to say that over the last 3 years, we've invested really heavily in what we've done with regard to reducing our carbon emissions, probably somewhere close to 10 million euros, which is money that comes directly out of our profitability and therefore straight out of our ability to grow and to expand our business. Now, we've seen some really significant results from that, which I'm glad to say. As an industry, not so much. The transport industry over the last 3 years has seen an increase in their emissions of close to 7%, right? Which is not what we want. We know that we're not going to hit, as a country, we're not going to hit our emissions reductions. We've seen what the EPA said last week. We're going to be really well short of that. Probably only 29% of our emission reductions is where we're going to hit. As in our business, though, we're seeing something different because of that investment. We've reduced our emissions in the last 3 years by 45%, which is a really significant number. And that's considering, in light of what I've said there about our business growth, close to nearly 20% business growth in the same period. Okay, so from a perspective of what we'd like to see, that the investment that we put in, there's a few things that we've had to do in order to achieve that. And where that money got spent is things like, for example, the cost of the capital cost of, say, EVs versus diesel, for example, vans. That's a very significant cost, somewhere between 70 and 100% more expensive to buy an electric van over a diesel van. So, and we're currently running at over 300 of those in our network. So it's really a significant number, and we fund that ourselves. Charging infrastructure is a real problem. Unlike what the general public have access to funding to install charging infrastructure. As businesses, it's very limited what we can access there. And we put in, hundreds of charging stations across the country. I know the government has announced recently that they're going to put in some more charging infrastructure across the national motorways and stuff like that. But for us, it needs to go much deeper than that. We operate in every part of the country, so it's really important that we have to go beyond that. Besides the charging infrastructure, then we've got to the point now where the single biggest obstacle for us as a business is the provision of electricity and power. Energy is a real problem now. And it's a problem on two fronts. The first front is, there are certain areas of this country where we can't actually expand our ambitions anymore because we just cannot get access to enough power to charge our vehicles. We've got nearly 1,500 vehicles on the road. 95% of those we've committed to be on low emission by 2030. So very short period of time. We're very aggressive in our targets. So that's a real challenge. We're now hitting a wall where we can't actually charge. We certainly, in your own constituency, Minister, we have one of our largest operations, and we've had to take electric vehicles out of there because we just can't get enough power into the building to actually charge them, which is it's a terrible thing to do. And then the second part of that really is that the cost of providing that infrastructure when it is available is really, really significant, and so those are things that we really need to address. And the last thing, and I know I've spoken to you about this before, Ministers, around biofuels and particularly around HVO. HVO is a fantastic short-term solution to our carbon emission problems. It's a direct replacement for diesel. You can use it in public cars and vans, direct replacement, no retrofit required. But of course, the problem with it is that it's a premium product. So we've had to pay a premium to support that. We've done that. We currently, in our middle mile, we've now transformed all of our HGVs to HVO, giving us a 92% reduction in emissions on those routes, which is really significant when you're talking about these types of vehicles. These are real significant carbon emitters. So those things, those 3 or 4 things really would make a big difference to a business like ourselves who are investing quite heavily and achieving really significant results. We can see the results that it's generating. So we'd really like to see some...
Which is what the government wants, is for private industry to be making those investments and strides.
100%. Yeah. And, there's as we know, it's a double-edged sword. we know that if we don't achieve these things, there's two types of things. There's two things that are going to happen. Number one is, as an economy and the environment, we can see it every day. There's impacts, but probably a harder fact is the fact, we're going to get fines, and we're going to have to pay for this one way or another very shortly if we don't actually respond as a country and start delivering these numbers. And it's a really tough challenge.
Yeah. Regina, I might come to you just in terms of your role as president of the Athlone Chamber here. What are the things maybe some of the members are saying that they'd like to see in the budget next year, or there are issues out there that the government might look to address?
I suppose, again, from an SME point of view, and we mentioned the entrepreneurs being the backbone of a lot of things that happen in the economy and everything else. It's really important to know what supports are going to be put in there for start-up businesses, for businesses that are actually in business at the moment and struggling with an awful lot of the new policies. I know we said it, and everybody would agree, that they're very good for our employees, and for people who have a large number of employees, it really is a big challenge. So what supports will be put in place for them? We're looking at the infrastructure of the town, and changes and everything else taking place. You can see it all developing. It's brought challenges to a lot of businesses in town, where we've seen some closures of businesses that were really good businesses that have taken a number of years to build up, and for whatever reason, again, talking to them, a lot of them have said it's the additional cost of doing business, and the additional cost of doing business is real for people. So it's looking to see what supports can be put in place to keep them in business, and also to support new startups, but it isn't another burden. We talked about administration and all of that stuff as well, I suppose concentrating on what your core business is and not getting caught up into loads of other areas, which is challenging. It's looking at the challenges that are there, and every business is very different. Specifically, again, what the supports for people, the training that people are getting as well, to look at how we're at full employment as well. And if we can't get people, Colin has mentioned that people are so important. Yeah. If we can't get people, how can we open up the critical skills list to be able to employ people to come into Ireland and be able to work? Those things are really important.
And that brings me to, Alison, you might be able to take this. I mean, I know the government is doing some work on how to use the 1.5 billion National Training Fund. I mean, that's obviously something that I'm sure your sector would be very interested in seeing some change there.
I mean, if you were asking the same question as to what we wanted for the budget, it would be funding for students, funding for the sector, but also funding for the student, and that NTF fund is the thing that can release funding for the student. And I mean, in that sense, the broadest definition of students. So while our undergraduate students are probably what people think about in the main, as we progress into this very changeable environment influenced by technology and many other sectoral shocks, we're looking at, I suppose, an era where the upskilling of existing employees is part of what we need to be doing. Yeah. So the releasing of funding under the NTF would, of course, release that. And we've had initiatives in the past through Springboard or HCI, but there's an amount of funding there that can free up really ongoing, I suppose, training and education. And we're seeing more and more, our development at the TU sector. We're putting in place more hybrid, more flexible forms of learning. So we're catering more and more for those people who maybe, in my own department, we've put in place an MSc in leadership, which reflects the dynamic, changing world that we're in, and it's all volatile and uncertain. But it addresses systems and research thinking. It addresses inclusive leadership. It addresses leadership around hybrid working and all those things that are new and different. And we have others in terms of AI and so on and so forth. But I suppose that NTF, releasing the funding there is really important.
Yeah, because it is very significant. I mean, it's a levy on employers that goes into, and it's been building and building because we haven't been able to fully deploy it year after year. So,
and I suppose not to forget the student decisions. And I know when he was Minister for Education, Simon Harris was looking at SUSI and the applicability of that for part-time education. And again, that's something that will free up so many people to access the system. If we're talking about equal access to education, that's critical for us. But there are sectoral issues as well, and accommodation issues.
And Mike, from your perspective, I mean, is there, when you have a pot of funding like that, or you're looking for tax changes, do sometimes we need to do a bit more radical thinking sometimes on some of the unique challenges we come up with?
Most definitely, and as I was listening to people talking, I suppose the one thing that came into my head was around apprenticeships. And, you know, we're very lucky in the region to have such a high quality college pushing out high quality graduates. But in terms of apprenticeships and stuff like that, there probably needs to be a refocus there. Like, the ideal employee is a mix of book learning and on-the-job experience. You put the two of them together and you've got someone who can hit the ground running. So in terms of tax changes, as I was listening to people think, you know, if you look at something like the R&D tax credit, that's essentially a kind of a double deduction for R&D spend. You get your deduction and then there's an additional credit. Maybe if we looked at something around that with apprenticeships, again, just thinking outside of the box of, look, you've got a wage cost for an apprentice, but let's define some terms around what qualifying apprenticeships are and give that business an extra little boost in terms of a tax deduction to get money back into their pockets and encourage them to go down the apprenticeship route. With other things, yeah, I suppose it's always incredibly difficult for the minister because he's got so many things coming at him. Everyone is saying, I want this, I want that, I want the other. But it does come back to the key challenges again around housing capacity and the whole lot. In terms of accommodation and thinking of students and stuff like that, there is an accommodation issue there for students as well, which I think is well documented. And I know the Section 23 type allowances, which were guillotined and done away with, and probably got a little bit of a bad beat around the property crash at the time. Perhaps we could look and relook at them again, and more of a focused look at how we can invest into buildings and accommodation for students and accommodation in general, you know, retrofitting commercial and retail units back into.
Because a lot of the challenges we're talking about here are symptoms of a successful economy. Like, you know, we're just growing, there's capacity constraints, and they're almost to be expected. Folks, we're coming up on an hour, so if there's any questions, you might raise your hand and I'll come to you. And in the meantime, while you're maybe thinking of some of those questions, Minister, you might maybe address some of the things there, some of the capacity constraints in the economy. It is a sign of a successful economy, but like housing, energy, infrastructure, they're difficult challenges.
Yeah, they are real challenges. Maybe if I just touch on the National Training Fund first, because it continues to be raised, and I think it's only fair that it is raised because the fund has accumulated. It's about 1.5 billion now in surplus. The fund takes in about 1.1 billion a year, and over 900 million is spent. So there is a lot of money spent every year from the National Training Fund. But again, because we are essentially at full employment, the receipts coming into it exceed the expenditures that are coming out of it. It's not a bad thing to have a surplus in the NTF because in the event of a shock or a major downturn, there may well be a need for a major injection of funding. But that said, we are examining what we can do within the general expenditure framework. The issue is that even though it's in surplus within your expenditure rules, it doesn't give you additional headroom. It counts €1 of spending from the NTF counts in the same way as €1 of spending on social welfare, health and so on. But we are actively working on it, and I'm confident that we will have some proposals in the next number of months in the context of the budget. So there is just that imbalance at the moment. There's a lot more coming in than going out, and that surplus is going to grow to, I think, about 1.75 billion by the end of this year, I would estimate. So very, very much aware of it. And we know the need is there, that there is a need for the students, for certainly employers. who are paying into the fund and who are doing their best to meet the upskilling and the reskilling demands of an economy that is rapidly changing. Only yesterday, myself and Minister Burke launched a number of reports on the impact of artificial intelligence on the Irish economy, on the labour market, on the public finances, on the structure of our economy. So we have a lot to think about and a lot to work through.
That's surely an area where you could deploy some of the...
For sure.
AI is going to be disruptive.
For sure, and I think it will, in the round, be positive, but there will be some sectors and some roles, some occupations that are at risk. And so we have to get ahead of that with our investment in training and upskilling and work our way through that. So there's a lot of work underway there. There is an AI strategy and there's an AI advisory council. I want to acknowledge the work of Robert Troy, who's here as well, and who was, of course, a former minister in the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and a local TD here for his work in that department and on all of these issues, and being such a strong advocate for the region on an ongoing basis. But you highlighted about capacity issues. Look, housing is the dominant one, for sure, and that's why it is unashamedly our #1 domestic priority. We are providing about 5 billion of capital a year now, and that will increase over the period ahead. But the state can't do it all, and that's why if we want to get to around 50,000 units a year, that requires about 20 billion euro per annum of investment in our housing stock. That will come from banks, from non-banks, institutional investors who are internationally based, and of course the state through local authorities, approved housing bodies, Land Development Agency, the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, lending from Home Building Finance Ireland, and by the Housing Finance Agency. So it's our top priority. We are making progress when you look at the numbers. We are, and we can all see activity around the country, but it is the #1 constraint. But energy is a huge issue as well. That's why we are working with EirGrid, with the CRU. That's why we are really prioritising renewable energy. It is the future. I think Europe got a huge shock when Russia invaded Ukraine. Europe had to pivot very, very quickly and lessen the dependence pretty much overnight on the importation of Russian gas. And the future for us is renewables. We just need to do more, and we need to do it faster.
Do you think the planning bill will help?
It will help. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a silver bullet and that it will resolve all ills in the planning system, but it will definitely provide more certainty around the timelines, that when you enter the planning process, you know when you will come out of it with a positive or a negative decision from your perspective. We've also set up a division of the High Court now that is focused on planning and environmental issues. We've appointed judges who are exclusively focused on that issue, so that should streamline and make more efficient judicial review applications and so on. People have a right to object, have a right to go to courts, but the process should be efficient and it should be quick, so that we all know where we stand when it comes to pieces of infrastructure that are in the system.
Yeah. Folks, anyone with a question for any of our panel here this morning, you might raise your hand if you'd like to, and we get a microphone to you. Anyone out there? Just on the back there.
Minister Michael Dolan, Mount Temple Golf Course. I spoke with you here the last morning we had breakfast regarding the VAT. The VAT on the golf course industry. Back 8 years ago, it was level pegging between all the golf courses, both members and privates. But then a derogation was brought in by a UK members club where the VAT was exempt for them. And then the revenue over here pulled it up and left us in the same boat. We were paying VAT in the private sector. Now, as you realise, tourism is the second natural resource we have, and the golf is probably the biggest money spinner within it. Now, in the last 8 years, we've had Brexit, COVID, and the Ukraine, and the costs within the golf course industry have been enormous, maybe gone up four times. And we've been left in the private sector. Maybe over half of this is family owned. And we think it's time that the thing is put level. Where the golf course industry working together with the Hidden Heartlands group here in this region. I happen to be chairman of it. and we're pushing the region. We have fantastic golf courses, world class. We have Shane Lowry's and Leona Maguire's coming from it, and you don't produce those kind of golfers unless you have the golf courses. But on the VAT section, I think it's more than time that you brought it back to where it was, and that we can all run together. The costs are enormous, and we can't. We're going to lose golf courses, and we don't want to have that happen. So I'd ask you to bring in a derogation and eliminate the VAT off the private side, and we all run together. We're pushing the region here for the golf, but we need to push it on a level field, and I'd ask you to have a good think about it, please.
Michael actually mentioned this beforehand. It's some anomaly that there's a dual VAT system for golf courses where privately owned golf courses are charged VAT rate that's higher than member-owned golf courses. Something you might prioritise in the budget.
Yeah, I'd
Minister.
certainly have a look at it, Michael. Thanks for raising that. And my colleague Grant is here, and he's going to take notes of the different issues that are raised. And look, I'm a big golf fan. Unfortunately, I don't have time to play very much or at all, in fact, these days. But I know it's a very important part of our tourism offering, as well as being a very important leisure outlet here in Ireland. And we all take great pride in the success of all of our golfers. So I will examine the issue. It could well be that one part of it is deemed to be in the course of business and the other part is not deemed to be in the course of business. And when it comes to that, we have certain national discretion within our own legislation in Ireland, but we do have to comply with the EU VAT directive. So I will examine it. We might have a word afterwards, and we can take it up from there.
Folks, any more questions for the Minister? Alan, there's just here. The microphone just up here. Yeah.
Thank you. Alan Shaw is my name. I think a lot of our the tax heads are determined at European level through EU directives and so on. And with the recent wins in Europe by the far right, I'm just wonder what the Minister's view is of the influence that might have on taxation going forward, where Europe plays a much greater role in our taxation affairs and the risks that brings.
Sure.
And I suppose the importance then of our own MEPs who are now being elected, of they being briefed in this area and ensuring that they protect Ireland, and I suppose they're the increased influence that they need to bring to bear on our taxation rates and so on, and our battening for Ireland in Europe, and the importance of that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Despite many efforts over many years, we have managed to preserve unanimity in relation to taxation matters at an EU level, and so there is in effect a veto that each member state has, but there are continuing policy efforts and initiatives coming from the European Union that would have consequences for Ireland, particularly in the corporate tax space, and we have to be very alert to that. I mean, we signed up to the OECD agreement back in 2021. We have implemented our obligations. We changed the rate, as you know, for very large companies with a turnover of over €750 million to 15%, up from 12.5%, but the 12.5% remains for all other businesses in Ireland, including all SMEs and so on. But we do work very closely and make sure that our MEPs are fully briefed on taxation files that are coming before them. As you know, there is co-decision making now within the European Union, so the Parliament has been given a greater role and enhanced powers in recent years, and I think that's a good thing because they have a democratic mandate. They can be traced back directly to the people who elect them, but it does mean there's a requirement then for much closer collaboration between member state governments and their representatives in the Parliament, so that what I do at Eurogroup and at ECOFIN, where I meet all of the other EU finance ministers, is consistent with the voices of our MEPs in the European Parliament. But the key point is there is still unanimity, but that issue continues to get raised, and there will always be more proposals at an EU level to try to get greater control on a central level. But the main threat we face, to be honest, on taxation is the concentration risk in corporate tax. So the Fiscal Advisory Council there gave an estimate recently that in 2022 the top 3 companies paid 43% of all corporate tax. That was nearly €10 billion from 3 companies. And that was in the context of Ireland, in total across income tax, corporate tax, VAT, capital taxes, stamp duty, taking in €80 billion that year, 10 billion from 3 companies. So you can see the risk that's there, and that's why we have to implement our policy of setting up the Future Ireland Fund, the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund. So later on today I'll be in the Shannon bringing that bill through the very final stages. It's already passed the Dáil, so that will be signed into law hopefully in the coming weeks, and by the end of this year we'll have €10 billion on those 2 funds. And what the infrastructure one does essentially is it means we get away from that boom-bust approach to public capital investment. One of the reasons why we have such a housing challenge now is that for a decade there was very little house building in Ireland. Government had to hit the brakes on spending when we had the financial crisis. So the plan is that we will have funding put aside, that the next downturn, the next shock, that we can access that funding, top up our public capital programme and invest through the economic cycle and maintain a consistent high level of investment in housing, in energy infrastructure, in transport, healthcare, education and so on. And that's a really important initiative, because there's a great temptation to spend receipts today that we're collecting now. But if you make permanent commitments on the back of receipts that could prove to be temporary, and those receipts do evaporate, you're left with a huge hole in your public finances, and we know the price that we all have to pay if that happens.
Folks, we're coming up in an hour, so I might just go through final points with each of my panellists before we wrap up. This is a pre-budget submission, or pre-budget briefing, I suppose, with the Minister. Mike, I'll start with you. If you had one thing you'd love to see in this year's budget, what would it be?
I suppose we're coming back, and the Minister mentioned about the simplification process. I suppose a start down the road on our income tax system and simplifying that in terms of if you're looking at foreign direct investment, and when people come and look at brand Ireland, it is still very, very, very attractive. But the one thing that probably gets most head scratching is when they're talking about relocating their top executives. You start talking about income tax, then you start talking about USC, then you start talking about PRSI, and it's a lot for people to get their heads around. There's been talks about potentially merging USC and PRSI together just to simplify it all down. So I think, look, in terms of that, and look, our marginal rates are incredibly high, and the point at which you start to pay 50% in tax is at a very low bar compared to the rest of Europe and beyond. So look, I know that that's something that probably will be addressed through the 20% bans and increases to tax credits and putting more money back in people's pockets. But yeah, continuation down that road would be very welcome.
Yeah. Alison, yourself?
I suppose it has to be funding for the sector. Excuse me. So funding for the sector on a core funding basis. So there have been many initiatives to, I suppose, allow the TUTF to support the technological university sector. But it's about making those sort of investments and structures which allow us to draw down funds that are already agreed, and to make it part of the core funding structure going forward, together with the ability to borrow, so that we can support in some way the accommodation issue for students.
Yeah, because that could help the governments if the universities are able to invest in infrastructure. Regina, from your perspective, on behalf of your own business, but also equally, I suppose, from Athlone Chamber members, any key priority that you'd like to?
Again, it would be for support for the SME sector, there for the challenges that their concerns and challenges are heard, and that the sector are consulted with before, if you look at all of the things that came together for the SME sector, the sick pay increase in wages, competition in wages there, that sort of made services struggle, and the other things that are coming down the tracks, that it's looked at to see what the impact of that will be. and that they're supported. From my own sector, Alison mentioned core funding. That's a real core funding in our sector at the moment is a real burning point and discussion, because while we entered into contract with the government to provide a service, right now there are 4,500 providers around the country who have no idea how they're going to budget, because we don't know what core funding is going to contribute to us or how it'll be allocated. So we would ask that you certainly would look at that first and bring that message back. We're waiting. Last June they told us we wouldn't be waiting. This June we're still waiting for that information. And it's really important for us. I think where our town is concerned and everything is that obviously the supports continue to come through our county council. It's that they're funded, I suppose, and supported as well to be able to continue the great work that has started here with the infrastructure in the town, our water services and everything else that's going on. It's really important to get our traffic flow right. I suppose a few people would ask, that's not your problem, Minister, I know, but the traffic flow is a problem in the town at the moment. But overall, I think that we need to look at, appreciate what we have, really appreciate what's working well, but supports that need to be put in place there. Accommodation in the town is still a problem for people coming in who want to either study or work in Athlone or live in Athlone. Even though we have a whole load of new housing coming on stream, it's still, as Alison says, we would find that the accommodation is an issue for students and people coming to work in the town. I think that overall, I don't really know what else I can say. Because
no, you've given them a good list there now.
A lot has been said. I think everybody is very aware of the challenges that are there. And like you said, there is a lot of people asking for a lot of different things, and it's hard to be all things to all people. But we have to prioritise in ensuring that jobs are there and that jobs are being created, and they are being created by the entrepreneurs and by the SMEs. And obviously by the multinationals, and we're very lucky to have the IDA Park here in Athlone and all of the businesses that are there, and indeed out in Monksland. And we need to look at creating and working together, I suppose, as county councils. Look at Athlone, Roscommon, Moat, look at the bigger Midland picture that's there, and work on developing that.
To be fair, the IDA have done a very good job in their regionalisation strategy over the last decade and brought some brilliant investments to outside of Dublin and the cities. Colin, from your perspective, you're a nationwide business, so I mean, if you had one key thing that you'd love to see change in the budget.
Just one.
That's all I'm offering.
I suppose, look, I just make the comment, first of all, that thankfully we're in a very good position in the country. The economy is going really strong, and I think it's testament to what we've all had to do over the last number of years, because we've had the most significant challenges probably that we could have ever imagined, between the two massive shocks of Brexit and COVID, which I mentioned earlier on. But if I was to ask really for two things, okay, one is, and these will be no surprise here really, but the energy infrastructure is really a thing, right? And we really need to address that. That is going to impact in not just the long term, but in the really short term on our ability to bring in new industry and to do all the things that I talk about with regard to sustainability and reducing our carbon emissions. And the second thing is really about the supports for business with regard, and I know you hear that all the time, right? But from a perspective of supporting the sort of things I'm talking about, which is they support our ambitions to reduce the carbon emissions in our country. The government has done fantastic things and fantastic work with regard to supporting the general public in things that they do, but we need similar supports for business, because we're quite a significant part of the economy when the transport industry is. If you were to extrapolate all of our, I think we account for something like 10% of all of the emissions for the country. You know, we really need to, and we take it seriously. We need to address that, and we would really welcome support from the government to help us achieve that for the country.
Mm-hmm. Minister, I'll give you the final word. I mean, a lot of the things we've talked about this morning is just, as I said, they're symptoms of a very successful economy. We're doing really well here in Ireland. It's about maintaining that because other parts of the world are struggling. It's an open economy that we have here in Ireland, so we're not immune, I suppose, to some of that. So maybe, I suppose, to finish, you might give me your outlook on inflation and economic growth and what your department officials are telling you, and where you think you know.
Yeah, well, first of all, just to thank all the panellists for their contributions. I think they've all made really good points, and I would acknowledge them. I mean, what Mike said on income tax. We have a highly progressive system in Ireland, internationally recognised as such, with the marginal rate of 48% up to 70k, and then 52% beyond that, and if you're self-employed, it's 55% beyond 100,000. So there is an issue around the overall distribution of the burden. It is a highly progressive system, and we'll see what we can do in the context of the budget. I mean, the overall emphasis within the budget, again this year, as with last year, it is primarily expenditure relative to tax. It tends to be about 5 to 1. But I'll be as imaginative as I can with the resources I have available, particularly to support enterprise and to reward work. I think it's important that we do that. I think we have to recognise that investment in people, and talent and education has been such an important pillar of our success. And wherever I travel around the world, when I meet multinational executives, with the IDA, it always comes back to talent. It comes back to the ability to deliver here in Ireland, and also that collaboration with the academic and education sector and industry, and that's so important, and it's important for SMEs as well. So I do acknowledge the point around core funding, and we'll do the best we can. Childcare, like a lot of extra money has gone in recent years into childcare. There's been a step change in investment, and the state's role has really been amplified. But I accept there's a need for certainty of funding at an early date, and I will bring that message back to Minister O'Gorman, Regina, that you have raised about not knowing from September onwards what your core funding provision is. And I think that the sustainability of the sector has to be a key consideration. I think we've made a lot of progress with the National Childcare Scheme, and terms and conditions for the employees has improved, and it had to improve, and I think that will continue, and parents have seen significant reductions in the fees, but all of that is no good if the place isn't there. So the sustainability of the sector is something we're very conscious of. We have discussed at the Cabinet a number of times, including yesterday. So there is that awareness there, and I will bring that message back. And to Colin on energy infrastructure, I think it is vital because it is an enabler. If we don't get that right, and to hear from you that it is already a constraint in some parts of the country when it comes to the deployment of electric vehicles, commercial vehicles and so on, that is a concern, and obviously I've heard it before from others. So we are working with Airgrid and the CRU and ESB networks and so on in terms of investment in the grid and in that infrastructure. And look, the theme of just the cost base generally of SMEs, I think, is once again a consistent theme and an overall takeaway. I think one risk we have to guard against is complacency, that it will always be like this. We'll always have full employment, and that our economy will be in good shape, and that we'll be running budget surpluses, and that we'll have choices to make. We have to understand how we have got to this point, and it is good policy over a long period of time at a national level, and it is also our educational system and private industry and all of us working together. So we have to recognise what the ingredients are and build on them. So secure them and build on them and guard against that risk of complacency, which is a real one. But the outlook is broadly positive. The growth that we forecast is modest but steady. 2 to 3% over the next number of years. We think we are entering into more stability in terms of inflation. We're forecasting around 2% this year. We think employment levels will continue to grow, but in a tight labour market, your capacity to further grow the number of people working is limited. It is dependent on bringing in skilled labour into Ireland, as well as addressing underemployment issues in Ireland. And there are underemployment issues, and childcare, of course, is inextricably linked with that, because if there isn't an affordable childcare place available, then that parent may not be able to work. And so there is an underemployment issue there, and there's an issue with the interaction of certain benefits as well, secondary benefits in particular. So we have to continue to address all of that, but we do envisage that the employment situation will remain strong, unemployment remaining at about 4 to 4.5%. We have over 2.7 million people working. That's a record high for Ireland. We've never been at that level before. I think there is a softening in the labour market. It's modest, but there are some signs of softening there from the economic data that we receive. The external outlook, as Colin has said, remains challenging. It's very uncertain, and the European economy is quite weak compared to the other main trading blocs. Growth of less than 1%. US economy has surprised on the upside. China, it's difficult to get a full handle on what's happening, but the IMF recently upgraded the growth forecast for China. But it's interesting that the ECB has been able to reduce interest rates. Other central banks around the world have not been able to, because of the stickiness of inflation in some cases, but in other cases because the economies are performing quite well, including in the United States. So it's a mixed bag externally. We're small, we're open, we depend on international trade, we depend on there being demand for the goods and services that we produce here in Ireland. So the external environment is vital, and that's why we have to use the levers that are under our control to the very, very best of our ability, and make sure that we have an enterprise-based economy that rewards work, that supports entrepreneurs, that sustains viable SMEs into the future. And I've heard the feedback here this morning and elsewhere, and I think we have work to do to achieve those objectives. But I just commit on behalf of the government that we will do the very best we can in the context of the budget. Well,
Minister, thanks very much for taking the time to come down here and address all these different issues for Athlone Chamber. It's a really vibrant chamber here, as you can tell, and we really do appreciate your time. So, folks, you might put your hands together for our panel here this morning.
Okay, so just to wrap up, I would like, first of all, just before you leave, to bring your attention to our Successful Business Awards, which will take place again this year in the Athlone Springs Hotel in November. Tommy, am I right? Yeah. And there's two opportunities for it there. First, to enter the competition and also to sponsor. So Tommy will be very happy to discuss that with anybody who wants to talk to him about it. I would like to sincerely thank our sponsors, RBK, DPD and TUS, the Shamrock Lodge management and staff, in particular Nicola and Mary, for their assistance in organising this event, to Coyle Events, Deirdre McElroy and RBK, our photographer Eric Malloy, our office staff Saoirse and Sarah, and in particular our CEO Tommy Hogan for organising today's event. I would like to thank Minister McGrath for taking his time out of a very busy schedule to be here with us today and sharing his thoughts and listening to and hopefully considering ours. My sincere gratitude to our panellists, Alison Sheridan, Colin Kennedy, Lorcan Allen and Mick Scanlon, for their time, support and their expertise, which is greatly appreciated. I thank all of you who joined us here today and all of us who joined online. And until we meet again, I wish you all good health, happiness and success in all you do, and have a good day. Thank you.